I need you to hate so I can use you for your energy.
This is real sales talk. Real sales advice from real sales practitioners. Giving you tips on how to dominate your sales quota are your co-hosts, Sean Mitchell and Phill Keen. This episode is brought to you by Convertist. We are incredibly excited to have partnered together with Convertist, which helps SaaS and services run managed outbound campaigns for teams looking to drive new pipeline opportunities. For teams targeting mid-size and enterprise deals, Convertist integrates with CRMs like Salesforce to uncover actionable data in their sales processes, which enables them to find areas of improvement and double down on strategies that actually work. Benchmark the lead generation performance expected of a seasoned SDR and identify actionable areas of improvement in a sales process, all out of one place with Convertist. For teams looking to measure and enhance their performance of their sales funnel and architect a better revenue engine, cast an application to join the Convertist Slack group. It's at convertist.com/Slack. That's Convertist, convertist.com/Slack, SLACK. What is going on, everyone? It is Sean Mitchell and Phill Keen back with another episode of Real Sales Talk. We are season 8, episode 6, and it's Eclipse Day. Phill, did you go out and look at the sun?
I looked through the window. I had glasses on, so I'm not blind. I'm good.
That's good.
I saw what I need to see, and it was full eclipse, and we're good.
Yeah. I felt like I got a little bit more taken over by the whole buzz of. I was, pretty pessimistic at the beginning of the day, but then I just got caught up and couldn't help myself but look outside and, put on a pair of specs and see the eclipse. I checked a few times, but yeah.
The SDR that's working for us made a video of himself in the glasses. And then made a joke about how it fits into our product, but it's playing really well. So there's been a bunch of responses.
That's cool. That's cool. So we've got a cool guest today. We've got Jay Acunzo, and he's a keynote speaker. He's also a podcast host, and we want to welcome him to the show. So welcome, Jay. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I did not get to see the eclipse today because I've basically just been recording in my little home studio here all day long. But it's a pleasure to actually tune into the outside world through a screen, I guess.
That's the thing I was going to add is there's no shortage of information online on YouTube. I was watching NASA's live stream earlier today and caught a glimpse of that. So if you didn't get glasses and you didn't make yourself a cereal box viewer, the internet's a beautiful thing. So Jay, excited to talk about intuition, following your intuition. You've got a podcast that I'd love for you to just kind of tee up our conversation today. What is your podcast? What is it all about? Tell us.
So the name of the show is Unthinkable. And what we're exploring is the dark side of the information age, which is advice overload. So more than ever before, if you don't have an idea or an answer for your work or pretty much anything, you can just find and follow somebody else's. And more of that advice, gurus and secrets and hacks and tips and tricks, it just gets poured onto you, especially at work, every single day, and it just never ends. It's a deluge. And I think what gets lost in that is you, like the stuff that you uniquely bring to your job, both to have a fulfilling career, but also to impact whatever it is you're doing, your sales quota, your team's success, your company's success, your customer success, you name it. If I plucked you out of the equation and replaced you with somebody else, the work would look fundamentally different, but we don't recognize or hone that enough. I think that there's power in that. So what the show explores, we call it stories of conventional thinking and the people who dare to question it. Because what ends up happening, and as the name Unthinkable implies, is you see someone doing something new, different, innovative, creative, however you brand them, and you think, oh, that's crazy. Right? You probably have those things yourself where you come across a thing, whatever it is in your personal life or work life, and you kind of laugh to yourself or shake your head. You're like, that's so cool, or that's so crazy, that'll never work. And when you talk to the person who does it, very rarely, if ever, are they like, yeah, this was a huge risk and a dumb idea. Typically, they actually mitigate that risk. They know something you don't about their audience, about themselves. They're using their own intuition. They're thinking for themselves in a world where everybody else can just follow someone else's list. So what we explore on the show is that gap between the two things. The conventional wisdom says run to the right. This person ran to the left. On the outset, that seems crazy. Let's figure out how they did it and why. Typically, when they unpack it, it seems rather logical. And it always comes back to the same unsatisfactory thing in my life, which is intuition. So we're also trying to figure out, like, okay, if that's why you're saying you did that, what is intuition? How do we make it practical?
Yeah, so I want to get into some of those stories here in just a moment, but I've always been fascinated by this idea of intuition and following your intuition. Maybe just wrap on that a little bit, Jay. Sure. What is it, and how do people? Is it innate, or is it developed?
So the problem with the word intuition is the interpretation that we've had throughout our lives is very squishy, right? So if you were to say, here's a best practice, suddenly that makes sense. Yeah. It's I can use it proactively in my work. I can follow a list, or I can hold that like a tool in my hand and wield it. Intuition, though, that's squishy. That's, the muse striking you, or you're in, like you said, the word innate. Even actually through history, people have tried to define this term. Like Albert Einstein actually called it our most sacred gift. He actually demoted what he's known for, which is the rational mind, to a servant of the gift, which is intuition. And his take was society is building itself in such a way that it favors the servant instead of the gift. That sounds great, right? Like his take was that it's a feeling for the order lying behind things. Wonderful. I don't know how to use that to my advantage. Malcolm Gladwell in the book Blink, he talks about intuition as rapid cognition, which is like snap judgments. Again, sounds great when he says it. You have snap judgments, pay attention to them. They're important. Some are good, some are bad, but pay attention. I get it. I don't know how to use it. Whether it's like pop psychology talking about the muse, or listening to the tuning of your body, or actual psychology talking about subconscious reasoning, or an idea called priming, which is stuff you experienced before but didn't quite notice actually influencing you today. Whatever the case, intuition doesn't feel like a practical tool until you look at the root of the word. So the root of the word intuition is intuere from Latin, which just means knowledge from within. So I like to think of this as thinking for yourself. And every job, every team, every individual should value that skill. So if I were to tell you that you have this ability to do something better than the conventional thinking out there, and you can do it maybe even quicker if you've been practicing this over and over again, you'd want to know how that skill worked. You'd want to use it in your work. And so if we boil it down as intuition is thinking for yourself, now what we have to focus on is not how to find an answer from some guru or blog, but how to understand the right questions to ask of all that expertise or of a scenario you're facing. So that's really what we're trying to do with the show, is like, let's shift focus from here's tips and tricks and we're handing it to you on a silver platter, to here's the questions these people asked that landed them in a great place. If you ask those questions, you'll do something different, but you'll start to pull out your answers from within and think for yourself.
That's a good segue into, I think you've talked about some actual defined questions. So I'd like for you to discuss that and talk to our listeners about those questions and how they can start to develop that intuition.
Yeah, we told a story recently about Mike Brown, who's the founder of a company called Death Wish Coffee. Now, I drink a lot of coffee.
I've heard of this company.
Here. Yeah. So this is coffee made from what's called Arabica coffee. Most coffee is. There's another type of bean called Robusta, which is highly frowned upon by coffee experts. And then in comes Mike Brown and his company Death Wish Coffee. And he makes all of his product largely with Robusta coffee, frowned upon by all the experts. It's unthinkable, right? Like that's the idea of the show, until you talk to him. And he's like, well, I started by asking myself, like, what is my own aspiration? And his aspiration was to create the world's strongest coffee. Because in his shop in New York State, he would get all these construction workers and entrepreneurs and truck drivers, all these like hard chargers would come into his shop and they'd ask for stronger and stronger coffee. So he just thought like, well, I can surprise that group of people if I created the world's strongest coffee. And so on average, you should roast Arabica coffee. It's pretty delicious. But Mike is not operating in an average state. And I'd argue none of us are. Mike is an exception because, again, he is at play and his situation is different than everybody else. So he followed his intuition by asking the first question, which is, what is my aspirational anchor? if I can articulate my intent for the future and kind of combine that with some kind of hunger that I have for what's happening today, I think outspins an aspiration. And if I can state that out loud, all of a sudden I have a filter that automatically helps me vet all the expert advice. So in the case of Mike Brown, he was able to say no pretty quickly to all these experts that advised him to use Arabica coffee, because he's like, look, my aspiration is this. I want to create the world's strongest coffee. I should use Robusta, right? So it doesn't make any sense on average, but in Mike's case, it makes total sense. So that's the first question that seems to permeate all these stories we tell, is what is your aspirational anchor? Something that you're able to use as a filter against all this generic advice out there and immediately make better decisions faster.
Love it. I've heard of this company before. So obviously he's gained some notoriety.
He won a Super Bowl ad. He entered a contest with 15,000 entrants, all small businesses run by Intuit. And these like passionate fans that Death Wish had early on voted him to the top. They won a Super Bowl ad. They sell millions of this stuff every year now. They're a thriving e-commerce brand. They have a podcast, a blog, a documentary series on YouTube. They've exploded. And it really did begin with Mike, who was running a struggling cafe in one town, asking himself, like thinking critically about like, what am I trying to do? Like, what do I aspire to do? And then he combined that with something else, which is an insight about his audience. So that's the second question, is like, what is your first principle insight, some foundational truth about your audience that others seem to have overlooked? And in the case of Mike and Death Wish, what he realized very quickly was that his customers were not actually after stronger coffee or more caffeine or more energy. They were after the ability to work themselves to death. And so that's what he sells. And he addresses that very overtly in all of his branding and all of his products, right? So you combine his aspiration to create the world's strongest coffee with this first principle understanding of what his customer is really after. And you have this like unstoppable command of your own context, which in the face of all that expert advice out there is pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it didn't sound like it was his original business idea. It wasn't really his innate ability to say, I'm going to go create the strongest coffee. It was just from actively listening to people that are around him. And he started to pick up some of these triggers. And it's a really interesting story. And if you think about how that would apply to like a sales process, it doesn't always have to start with the conversation starts with this part, and then you go to this part of the conversation, then you go to this part of the conversation. It's really just listening and feeling it out. Right. And just learning from repetition and picking up some of that muscle memory.
Right. And in the case of Mike's branding, Death Wish Coffee, that overtly states the insight he had, because that's what he did. He went from data, which is a bunch of people asking about strong coffee, to insight, which is like, I'm going to ask why until I can't get any further down. Oh, they want the ability to work really, really hard, so I'll sell that. It's the same in sales. It's the same in marketing. You know, your customer isn't trying to buy a better pillow. They're buying a better night's sleep. They're not buying business intelligence software. They're buying more confidence for the sales team. Whatever it is you're selling, there's some kind of fundamental reality that your customers are facing. And in business, we layer on so many things over the top of that. Quarterly goals and technology and processes and all this stuff that clouds that ability to understand what it is we're trying to do. You know, conventional thinking and precedent, certainly a big part of that. And if you can chip away at all that enough, you can get to the thing that you're actually in business to do. And I think entrepreneurs know this really well, like Mike, because that's why they start their businesses, is to address that problem. But if you have that foundational thing, now you build up in a logical way, and others are like, that's crazy or creative. And you're like, no, I just see the full picture here. I'm taking the logical path from there. You're starting on this layer of thinking up here, and you're going logically too. So it's about starting in a more fundamental place, I think.
So let's maybe pull that back just a little bit. Let's say I'm a sales guy that is at an organization that's been established now, and you're so far removed from the original thought process, the original way that a founder created a company, to, all right, we're 5 years in and we've thrown all these marketing language in there, and we've done all these things, and the process has been so well defined. I mean, how do you get back to that from a sales guy?
That's awesome. Let's make it super practical. Let's say you're focused on outbound emails and your open rates seem to be pretty poor, right? Like the only thing you're trying to do right now is improve that. Because it's like, we can reinvent the company later. You got to improve your email open rates or your response rates, or you got to improve, the ability that someone has to actually like be aware of your pitch or your reason you're reaching out in the first place, instead of mark spam or delete or ignore. Why are you sending email? Why are people answering email? Like, what is the point of your subject line? Let's talk about the first principle insight of your subject line. It's to get people interested enough to open it, right? Now you can abuse that and sound really kind of like spammy and over promising. I would argue a lot of people would sniff that out. Like, hey, message from your grandmother. That's probably not true. Like, don't do that. But the reason that you're sending an email is to get people to open the email. Then the reason you have something in the body is to get people to spend a little bit more time with it. And the reason they're spending time with it is you want them to then say, okay, I'm triggered enough that I want to respond. It's the same thing in like job applications, is people ask you to open the attachment when they should just be writing the cover letter in the body of the email. Like, you've gotten the first action, which is the email open, right? So everything you're doing, you should just be asking, like, what is this really for? And same with your product. Like, what is this for our customers, right? It's if you're the boss, it's maybe to drive more revenue for the business. But if you're the frontline individual who's using the product and you're a B2B company selling to that individual, it's to get them promoted. It's to help them not get fired if they feel like they're clock in, clock out employees. Whatever it is they're really after, you as a sales rep are on the front lines. You get to hear the emotion in the voice. You get to ask the questions. You get to talk to people. Where if you're so removed from that because you're an executive who doesn't talk to customers, shame on you, you're actually at a disadvantage even if you started the business, because you've lost that control over, the conversation. So I think salespeople are uniquely positioned to ask questions very simply, like, why are you vetting these technologies? Like, I'm so grateful that you're demoing our product today or talking to me. We have a bunch of competitors out there. I'm just curious, why are you trying to buy this type of technology? Just take yourself out of the equation for now. Maybe you can get something really meaty there that if you address that in your response or your pitch, oh my God, yeah, these guys get me and these guys don't. You see what I'm saying?
I think that's key too. And we've talked about this on a number of episodes, which is resist the urge to jump right into the product and talk about the product. And just listen, ask a question, and then shut up and listen and see what they have to say. And you learn a lot by doing that.
Right.
Okay, so aspirations, first principle. What's the next step?
The next question you should be asking yourself is sort of a personal question, which is why you? What is your unfair advantage here? So I'll give you an example. If you are at a company that is actually a really good example is Vidyard. They're a B2B company that sells video hosting technology. And their sales
today, actually.
There you go. So Vidyard is starting to turn its sales team on to this idea of sending short, personalized videos to their prospects as a follow-up. I think they do the same thing in other regards, like onboarding new hires and onboarding new customers as well. But since we're on a sales show, I'll talk about the sales team a little bit. They've understood that their sales team is young, energetic, charming. They're like a lot of tech companies, right? Good looking. And so why are we going to have them look and sound exactly like every single other group out there sending text-based emails? Or why should an email that we send, regardless of who's sending it, sound like everyone else? Let's do something a little bit different and use what we have to work with on the team. So I've seen some of their videos, and they have some like real charmers who don't come across at all as fake. They're authentically very charming and fun to listen to. And they send little videos, right? Because they look at the team, and they're like, this team is funny, or this team is witty or warm. That's not coming through at all in our emails. So let's analyze and audit our team, not just our product and our numbers. And from the team audit, we can decide, hey, this tactic might be worth testing. Go ahead.
I think this is so I see a couple of different angles. I'll mention an example of Vidyard. I saw it on LinkedIn maybe a week or two ago. It was, I think, a Vidyard sales rep who did it was a female. She had a guitar and she played a song to the actual prospect or customer client that she was trying to reach. So unique way, right? If you see the video thumbnail with someone with a guitar, you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? Someone wrote me a song or what?
Well, now here's the key in all that. If I were to show that as a case study in a keynote speech, for example, and people said, oh, okay, we should find a way to like sing a song to our audience, right? This is like how so many corporate viral videos end up tone deaf, because someone did it and did it well, and then you try to just graft the tactic on instead of ripping out the lesson or the approach. Because the lesson or the approach in that guitar-based video is, this person's great at guitar, seems pretty natural on guitar, sent a video playing guitar, right? If you're obviously a lousy musician, don't do it. But also if you feel like you come across as sleazy, as too aggressive, as tone deaf, like, you're trying to write a witty song for your audience when this company did that well, maybe you're not the comedian you think you are, right? Like this is about self-awareness. And I think it comes back to this idea of intuition being knowledge from within. It's sort of like we all have the ability to be different from each other, but we don't use that proactively and apply it to our work, because I think so often we just don't have the self-awareness. We don't take the time to think about, like, there's 17 other sales reps selling the same product, and how am I going to separate from them? It's not going to be the fact that I know something about sales they don't. It's going to be the fact that I've found a way to uniquely use what I have to bring to the table proactively, and maybe they haven't.
Jay, talk to the sales leader in this situation. How does he or she, the sales leader, empower sales reps to be self-aware and know what that unique thing is to gain people's attention?
That's a big question. And my knee-jerk reaction would be to say it's a culture thing. And I don't mean that in saying like the company culture needs to have like pithy statements on the walls and all that stuff. I think you have to change your sales team from do anything it takes to get the end result to do everything it takes to learn, right? It's from end results to learning how to get the end results, granted. But I think what happens is when you focus people on the process, they tinker more. They tend to get really deep and ask questions and turn things over in their minds, instead of, I'm so worried that I'm going to miss this end result. I'm so paranoid that that person's going to beat me on that chart right there that I can't let up the gas, or I can't change my approach, because if that doesn't work, this is an average approach and I know that, but if this is below average, I'm screwed. But what if it's above average, right? You need to give your team the permission to learn, whether that's from you as the leader, trying to carve out time in the schedule, trying to actually promote that culture. I think that's a huge part of it. But also it's about hiring the right people. It's about hiring those people that kind of treat their jobs like it's a craft or it's a science, where they're testing and iterating constantly. They're hungry, instead of the ones that just want the answer on a silver platter because they want to clock in, clock out, get the bonus, and go away on vacation. So I think part of it is what you can change internally. Part of it is the people you actually bring in.
So how would you go search for that? So if you look for the people that want to go build out process, they want to be the ones that are deeply involved in what's being built, and what would be the things that you're looking for? Real Sales Talk family, want to take a quick break just to say thank you to our partner Convertist. If you're interested in improving your game to drive leads, opportunities, or closes, join the Convertist Slack group, a place where sales and marketing operators can talk best practices to architect a revenue engine. Cast an application at convertist.com/Slack. That's convertist.com/Slack. Now let's get back to the episode.
I think part of it is about the interview questions you ask, not necessarily addressing the job, but addressing the person and trying to tease out how they are as people. So one example is, so my first job was at Google, and they talked a lot about mental athletes. And their definition of that changed over the years, and they ended up writing a book about smart creatives. But when I was getting hired there, they talked about wanting mental athletes. In other words, people that could really focus on one task and do it well, but had that agility, had that athleticism mentally to shift quickly, because inevitably they would focus us on different products or a different organizational structure to stay nimble and keep growing. And it's hard to test for things like that, but there's a number of things I've tried in job applications and job processes that have worked decently well for me in marketing that I think could also work in sales. One of those is in the job description, before people apply and they're just reading about the job, put a bullet that says attention to detail test, use, and then insert any word you want in your application. And if they don't use that word, they don't pay attention to detail, which is such an important thing when you're talking to prospects. And so that's one way to test for it, is like set up these filters about how people are outside of their salesmanship. Another thing I used to do with writers that worked really well, that might have an analog with sales, is I'd ask them, if I gave you 2 years of salary, you don't have to work, but you do have to write a blog. It can be about absolutely anything you want. As long as you write a blog on a consistent basis, you get this money. What are you writing about? And I didn't want to see a specific answer. I wanted to see the reaction style, the emotion. I wanted to see that they lit up and knew right away what they'd write about, or got really excited at the prospect, because that showed me they had this motor or this hunger to write. If they said, oh, I'd write about like marketing or SEO because that's the job they were applying for, I'd be like, bull, no, you wouldn't. Like, give me something about your motor, your hunger, about the person in the job application or process. And I can very accurately then say, okay, if I apply them to this problem over here, they're going to do well. So I guess to sum it up, it's not about knowing the answer. It's about hiring people that know how to find answers.
Love it. All right, so we've covered 3 questions. What's the next question that someone needs to ask?
So we've talked about your aspirational anchor. That's pretty big. We talked about your first principle insight. That's very foundational about your audience. We've gone back to you. What is it about you? What's your unfair advantage? Again, that can feel aspirational. What are your constraints is the next question you have to ask. I think oftentimes when you hear intuition or creativity or innovation, all these big terms, you think about this wide open field or creative freedom, which doesn't actually work well. All the studies about creativity show that putting constraints on the board, for example, yields more ideas and more effective ideas. But B, I also think creative freedom doesn't actually exist. So not only does it not work, it doesn't exist. Because if I said, write about anything, here's a blank page, you're going to start to install your own constraints. Sell to any category you want. You're going to start to put up some constraints. Well, I love sports because of my background and I have a contact here and whatever. And so embracing your constraints actually yields better ideas. And I think most people will use them as a complaint, a source of complaints, like, oh, I can't be more creative because I have this goal. Well, okay, if that's true, you can't do anything big now. What's something small you can do? In the world of writing, I'd always tell writers, can you open your paragraphs with a better story? I'm not asking you to write better stories. I'm not asking you to change the topic or the whole publication you write for. I'm asking you to take the 3 sentences you start with the next time you write and make that better or more authentically you. You don't need permission to do that. So find those little pockets of things within your constraints that you can start to improve, because what this does for you is it answers the next question, which is how can you expand? And the way you expand is based on results, not theory. It's not based on, oh, look, so-and-so did it over here, or so-and-so guru said it over here. No, or I read this in a book. No, it's about, I delivered this result. Wouldn't you like more of the same? Right? This prospect called me on my cell and was talking to me excitedly about working together. That's never happened before. That's only one person, boss. But what if we could replicate that? Wouldn't you want more of that? Right? It's an N of 1, but it's a passionate N of 1. So can I get a small number of people reacting in a big way? And that's really the last question, which is, I have my constraints. I know how to expand. Now, who are my true believers? That small number of people that reacted passionately to what I did, not just an open rate, but people responding in paragraphs. Oh my God, I can't believe you emailed me. This is perfect. The way you phrase it, that's great. That's signal that you're on the right path. And I think we discredit that in business too much because we want the big top line numbers. But if you can find true believers and win them over and give them an excuse to reply passionately, great case study for you to get more resources, great proof point that you're on the right path. A lot of good comes from getting those true believers.
So I think that's awesome. And looking at the world of sales, if you can just prove that something works, most times if you talk to most sales leaders out there, they're going to be okay with it as long as you're getting to your number and it's helping you produce. So taking a little bit of risk, and as long as you know that there's a reward at the other side of it, you can win. But let's say I'm in an organization where it's pretty cut and dry, black and white, I wear a tie, I can't do certain things, I feel super constrained, but I still need the ability to feel creative. I mean, what's some things that you could do maybe outside of work that would maybe help you inside of work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of side projects. In my career, that's always been blogs or podcasts. I've now turned side projects in speaking and podcasting into my full-time job. And that was helpful in getting jobs in the past. It was helpful in kind of honing my intuition and honing my sense of things. So you can launch side projects. I would also say, back to your original point there, if you're saying, well, it's buttoned up, it's black and white, it's too stuffy here, I want to be creative. Wanting to be creative or wanting more freedom to experiment is not a well-articulated aspirational anchor. Like, the starting blocks there are, what is my intent for the future? Can I answer that question? And also, what is this hunger that I have for the present? What am I dissatisfied with today? And if I can think about those two things and then articulate in one sentence what I aspire to do, now I can make sense of, well, maybe I can start to inch that way at work, or maybe I need to go outside, do a side project, look for another job. But I think this empty, or not empty, it's meaningful, this like non-concrete, just sort of meandering desire to be creative needs to then be met with like hard questions about yourself first. Before you point to your organization or your job, you need to be able to articulate, well, what does the satisfaction of that creativity look like first? Because a lot of things get a lot easier and a lot more logical from there.
Yeah, I'm curious to get some insight from you, Jay, on, I mean, let's say you've got a sales rep who is relatively successful, meets their quota on a month by month or quarter by quarter basis, annual basis, doesn't get into trouble, doesn't does what they're supposed to do, but they lack the aspiration to do something bigger or whatever that internal drive is. Like when you look at the very core of having an aspiration, what are some of those tactics or tricks that someone can implement to help develop and nurture that aspiration or aspirations?
Right. So let's say the scenario is I'm the sales leader and I have someone on my team who just kind of feels like I'm clocking in, clocking out. I'm doing well, but I think that person is capable of more. Right. So, because I think that's always where I start with my podcast, consulting, speaking, you name it. It's sort of like if you don't aspire to do exceptional work and you're fine hitting average and going home, my work is not for you. But I think that's most people, right? Most people do want to find meaning in their career. When they clock out at 5 sharp and leave, it's just that they don't feel they can find it, so they're out. I think most leaders are really, really good at articulating the intent they have for the future of the team, right? It's like, let's be part of the conversation. Let's win deals more quickly, or, we're in marketing, let's go viral, let's grow our followers, whatever. Almost every executive can accurately articulate an intent for the future. The missing piece is almost always the hunger, sort of like the problem we have with what's going on right now in the world or our world that makes it more of like a rally cry. And so I'll give you an example. The chief digital officer at Merriam-Webster's dictionary of all organizations is named Lisa Schneider. And her job is to make the dictionary cool, which kind of sounds like it kind of sounds like dad saying bae. Yeah. It's like the dictionary being cool. Like, all right, good luck. Like, let's take it down a notch there. Like, nice try, dad. But Lisa has done it with her team. And the reason is she understood how to articulate the aspiration for her team and rally them around it. And so at first she observed all this rote behavior on Twitter as one example. Automated posting, the same things every day, over and over again, no responses. Yeah, lots of followers, but nobody clicked and nobody responded. So who cares? So the intent here is to be part of the actual conversation, right? Engagement. That's easy. Every executive would know that. But most executives would stop there. But what she said is like, our voice is bland. And our voices internally, like on Slack or Happy Hour, were witty and warm and awesome, right? And so she combined those two things, and her aspiration for the team was, let's show the world how fun and relevant we really are. Like, that is an awesome aspirational anchor. It rallies people together. It forces you to answer that next question of like, why me? Like, why am I fun and relevant? Like, what is it about me? Oh, I'm sarcastic. Can I use that? Oh, I'm really timely with the news. I'm a news hound and fiend. Like, I can use that. Whatever it is, it rallies your team, forces you to start being more introspective instead of just grow more followers for this thing, or, hit your number quicker. Now I'm going to just try to search the blogosphere for the quickest way to do that. I'm going to do commodity work. Love it.
I have really enjoyed our talk with you, Jay, and we're going to move into exclusive YouTube content where we ask you 3 rapid fire questions. But before we do that, for those that are listening on the podcast and driving, where can they find you and your podcast?
Well, if you're already listening to a podcast, just search for Unthinkable and you can find my show that way. If you'd prefer to go to the browser, you can go to unthinkable.fm. And I use the email newsletter I send every week as kind of a DVD bonus features, where I do a lot of behind the scenes and I catch content that either can't make the final story or cut of the show, or it's better equipped to be in text or visual form. So a lot of times we'll reference that email newsletter. So between the email subscription and the podcast subscription, those 2 places are where you can find most of my work.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I hope our listenership definitely goes to take a look at it. I think there's some great takeaways there. And absolutely. Yeah. So let's jump into the exclusive YouTube content. So if you're listening on audio form, go ahead and transition over to our YouTube page, give it a subscribe, and skip to the very end, and you'll get some great insight from Jay. So first question for you, Jay, is it's February, beginning of February. NFL season has come to an end, and your favorite team has finally made it to the Super Bowl. What is that 15-second ad that you could say anything? What would that 15-second ad say to the world?
Oh my goodness. So my team is playing in the Super Bowl. and I'm running an ad for my business.
Could be your business. It could be an inspirational 15-second motivational clip, or it could be about your favorite team. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, I'm a big fan of being subversive, and I'm also a big fan of understanding like what people are thinking in the moment, trying to reverse engineer that back to the reality. Advertisers are very good at convincing themselves that advertising is welcome and enjoyable, and it's just not. And so if I had to run a 15-second ad, I would say something like, ads suck. You know what doesn't? Great stories. Go here for some great stories about X, and just leave it at that, right? Like, I think, I don't know why more advertisers don't realize this. I think it's hard when it's your job to get in front of people, right? And you've been doing it a certain way for years, to admit that most people don't like it. But when millions of people in the world download software to block your product ads, you kind of have to rethink if it's the right vehicle to communicate. So I would just blow it up. Ads suck. This doesn't. Go to this.
I love it. It's unconventional.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Very, very unique. Okay, so second question for you, Jay, is how has your mom or dad, or how have your parents influenced you into who you are today? What's that first thing that comes to mind? You think, because of my mother and father, I am this way.
Oh my gosh. I would say two things. One is the individual things each of them gave me, and one is the combination. So the individual things, my mom is a preschool teacher, has been for 20 plus years. My dad is a software engineer. As a child, I would create these like elaborate stories with Legos, but I would line them up in logical, neat order. And they would like look at me and like whisper to themselves. They saw like both sides of them like warring in my head. Turns out when you want to do creative work for commerce, it's a very useful ability to be able to waver between the content side of content marketing and the marketing side of content marketing, as one example. So they gave me that like dual-mindedness, which I'm very thankful for. But the big thing, the thing that's driving all of my work, especially with the show and my speaking, is they just gave me this ability to love, be comfortable with, understand, and seek out proactively the big questions and emotions in life. Like, so much of what we experience is just superficial, mundane, conventional crap. And I think, my whole message to people trying to make anything in the world, whether it's a sales message or content for marketing purposes, is just make them feel. If you can get someone to stop and question things and actually feel a big emotion, oh man, like all of a sudden, all this good stuff happens for your business, but also just for you as an individual. So I'm super thankful for that from my parents.
That's awesome. Cool. All right. Last question of the rapid fire. What book or resource, could be a podcast, it could be a professor, but what book or resource would you say has influenced your thinking today?
Yeah, I mean, I always point to the same teacher I had in high school, actually. It was a junior year English literature class. His name was Jack Shred, the late Jack Shred, unfortunately, but wonderful teacher. He was similar to my parents, so he kind of inspired you to think bigger and kind of be uncomfortable and be okay being uncomfortable by sitting with big thoughts and emotions. He did a wonderful job of like reenacting big passages in literature, like Great Gatsby or, Huckleberry Finn and all that stuff, but he really brought it to life. And from that moment on, I was just like, wow, that's what this stuff is for. It's not to sound smart. It's not to transact. Communication, whether it's literature or a quick email, it's for, that human connection, to see a commonality I didn't see before with somebody else, and to get permission that I have your time because I've made you feel or think something, to then continue. And I was blown away by that from, high school on, even earlier, but Jack Shred in high school was really the one guy that I think shifted my thinking on that. It's really had a profound impact on my life.
That's great. Really cool to hear.
Thanks.
I can think of a couple of teachers in high school that I still look back to and really remember with fond memories, some really great takeaways. So thank you to all the high school teachers out there. Shout out to high school.
Amen. Yeah. Big ups to high school teachers and beyond.
Right. Cool. Well, Jay, we've come to the end of our time here. It's been an incredible pleasure to get to know you a little bit more after following you from afar on social, and really looking forward to getting this into the hands of our listeners. So Real Sales Talk family, I want you to do one thing here as this episode comes to an end. I want you to go to either YouTube or Facebook, or give us a shout out on Instagram and let us know what your one takeaway from this episode is. So, Jay, I want to give you a chance to shout out your Instagram handle in case people want to follow the behind the scenes look at what you do.
Yeah, it's just the letter J, not the name J. The letter J, Acunzo. Simple as that. Or you can just search my name and you'll find me all over the internet.
Awesome. All right. Jay, thanks again. Pleasure having you on. And Real Sales Talk fam, see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to Real Sales Talk. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Convertist. If you enjoyed this episode, go write a review on iTunes or any other podcasting platform.